Sarashivasamarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmaracharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om. Good. Be seated, please. Okay. Good. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinapadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Good. Welcome to you all. Nice to have you here for our ongoing study of Bhagavad Gita. Also, welcome to our many students watching these classes online. We continue our study of Chapter 13. We'll begin with recitation, beginning with verse 20. And as always, as I'm chanting, read the translation and then repeat after me. Prakritam Purushan Chaiva Prakritam Purusham Chaiva Vidyanadi Bhavapi Vidyanadi Bhavapi Vikaransh Gunansh Chaiva Vikaransh Gunansh Chaiva Vidhi Prakriti Sambhavan Vidhi Prakriti Sambhavan Karya Karana Kartritve Karya Karana Kartritve Hetu Prakriti Ruchyate Hetu Prakriti Ruchyate Purusha Sukha Duhkanam Purusha Sukha Duhkanam Bhoktritve Hetu Ruchyate Bhoktritve Hetu Ruchyate Purusha Prakritistohi Purusha Prakritistohi Bhunkte Prakriti Jangunan Bhunkte Prakriti Jangunan Karanam Guna Sangosya Karanam Guna Sangosya Sarasadyoni Janmasu Sarasadyoni Janmasu Upadrashtanumantacha Upadrashtanumantacha Bharta Bhukta Maheshwaraha Bharta Bhukta Maheshwaraha Paramatmeti Chapyukto Paramatyeti Chapyukto Dehesman Purusha Paraha Dehesman Purusha Paraha Yahevam Veti Purusham Yahevam Veti Purusham Prakritan Chagunai Saha Prakritam Chagunai Saha Sarvata Vartamanopi Sarvata Vartamanopi Nasabhuyo Bhijayate Nasabhuyo Bhijayate. Very good. So let's go back. We finished our last class with verse 20. And can we turn this fan off, please? Yes. So in our previous class, we're dealing with the 3 sets of questions from Arjuna, the last of which we're discussing now, what is Prakriti and what is Purusha, which was one of Arjuna's 3 sets of questions. Prakriti, nature, and Purusha, consciousness. We had a long discussion about how to properly interpret those two terms. And our last class took those two terms at a very lofty level. We were discussing how Ishvara, the God of the cosmos, is the source for everything that exists. All that exists falls into two categories, Chit and Jada. Chit, conscious, sentient, awareful. Jada, that which is not conscient, that which is conscious, that which is not sentient, that which is inert. Whatever exists falls into one of those two categories, Chit and Jada. Ishvara, as the source of the cosmos, has to be the source of both consciousness and the inert elements. So here, the term Purusha is used to refer to that consciousness. Ishvara pervades the universe, dwelling in every sentient being as the source of consciousness. We've discussed this in several places. Similarly, Ishvara grants material existence to the entire universe, and you might remember our dream metaphor. So for your dream metaphor, you grant existence, you the dreamer. You are the creator, sustainer, destroyer of your dream creation. You grant existence, you bestow material existence on everything that exists in your dream. Of course, they don't exist as material objects, but whatever level of reality they have, the objects and people and things in your dream, that reality is given by you as a creator, sustainer, destroyer of the dream world. Also, in your dreams are many creatures, including people, who are sentient creatures, right? The people in your dreams are sentient people, conscious beings, awareful beings. Where does their awareness come from? You. So as the dreamer, you bestow consciousness and materiality on everything that exists in your dream world in the same way Ishvara, God of the cosmos, bestows intelligence, consciousness, awareness on every living being and bestows materiality on all that exists. Source of the elements, gunas. We discussed all that in the last class. With this class, we go off in a slightly different direction in discerning the difference between Purusha and Prakriti. And this is a good place to recognize that these teachings are not philosophical in nature. Remember their distinction. Actually, we haven't talked about it here recently, and it was in our Vedanta class that we made the point that philosophy is an abstract search for knowledge. But this is not philosophy in that sense. The teachings of Vedanta in general, and the Bhagavad Gita in particular, are not philosophical teachings. They're teachings intended to solve the problem of human suffering. You can't say that of philosophy. You can say that of these Vedantic teachings. And the way these teachings solve the problem of human suffering is by addressing a certain kind of confusion in our mind that is the root cause of suffering. This is where we come back to Vedanta 101, so to speak, where we've understood that all human suffering is the result of the non-recognition of your true divine nature. In very simple terms, failure to recognize your true divine nature is the root of all suffering. If you knew how full and complete and vast and limitless you truly were, and if you knew that your true nature was utterly unaffected by all the problems in the world, utterly unaffected by all the problems of your physical body, utterly unaffected by all the problems of your mind. If you know that, or when you know that, what can bother you? What can make you suffer? This knowledge removes suffering. And the kind of knowledge we're talking about now is very specifically a knowledge in the form of discernment. In Sanskrit, we use the word viveka. Viveka, often translated as discrimination. Discrimination has too many meanings, though, so I think discernment is perhaps a better translation. To discern the difference. And at the very beginning of this chapter, we began by discerning the difference between kshetra and kshetrajna. Kshetra, the field of experience. Kshetrajna, the conscious being who perceives or knows that field of experience. So that kind of discernment, we call it viveka, means discernment. Jnana means knowledge. So we call this viveka jnanam, discerning knowledge. Knowledge which leads you to discern properly. And here, since we talked about that discernment between kshetra, field of experience, and kshetrajna, the knower of the field of experience, that discernment was at the beginning of the chapter. At this point, we are now discerning the difference between Purusha and Prakriti. Now, I said that leads to the end of suffering. Let's be very specific about how it leads to the end of suffering. If you fail to discern the difference between Purusha, your true nature, as consciousness, that's what Purusha means in this context, your true fundamental, essential nature, when you say, I am, that I am expression ultimately points to who you are in a fundamental sense as an awareful, conscious being. An awareful, conscious being who's utterly independent of the body and mind. Utterly independent, why? Well, kshetra, kshetrajna, anything known to you is not you. How fundamental is that? Knower and unknown, different. Here's our discernment. Your physical body is known to you, therefore it is not you. Further, the problems of your physical body belong to your body and not to you. Suffering arises due to ignorance in the form of identification. We've had this discussion several times. It's central to the teachings of Vedanta. As soon as you identify yourself with your body, you are subject to all the problems of your body. By the way, the problems, your physical problems, are they increasing these days or decreasing? For most of us, they are increasing. Okay. So, if you are identified with your body, you are going to be increasingly subject to suffering. Similarly, if you are identified with your mind is known to you. It's not a physical object like your body, but your thoughts are known to you. Your emotions are known to you. Your moods are known to you. If you're in a bad mood, you know you're in a bad mood. You probably let others know as well. So all of this is known to you. Anything known to you is not you. So if you know the bad mood that's present in your mind, and if you're clear that the bad mood belongs to your mind and not to you, then you can be comfortable in the presence of that bad mood. This is no joke. And it's not some kind of lofty thing. It's something you can discover for yourself. If you truly understand that the bad mood belongs to your mind, and you, as the conscious observer, the awareful witness of that mind, you are absolutely separate, different, distinct. You can recognize how that bad mood doesn't truly affect you, and that will change your mood. You won't be resentful about having that bad. You won't be moping, oh, I feel so bad, why me, all of this stuff. That will all go away. Anyway, we've discussed that before. This is just to introduce these. We have a series of verses today which talk about this discernment. Discernment between, in this case, between Purusha and Prakriti. That's our context. Purusha here refers to your essential nature as consciousness. Prakriti refers to everything else, including your body, mind, and senses. So with that introduction, let's pick up the thread with verse 21. Karya karana kartritve, karya karana kartritve, hetu prakritiruchyate, hetu prakritiruchyate, purusha sukha dukkhanam, purusha sukha dukkhanam, bhoktritve heturuchyate, bhoktritve heturuchyate. Start in the second line. Prakriti, nature, uchyate is said to be the hetu, the cause. Nature is said to be the cause for what? Karya, karana, and kartritva. Now, what do these words mean? Karya can mean action. The commentator actually gives a better meaning. Karya is an effect. In this case, the effect is your body. So take karya as body. Better definition than mine. So body. Karana is instrument, organs of the body. We got two of these karanas. We got two of these karanas. We've got two of these karanas. Two of these karanas. Right? These are all instruments that you wield, and the most powerful instrument you wield isn't a pair. The most powerful instrument you wield is your mind, which is called antakarana. Karana again means instrument. Antaha, internal, inside. Most of our karanas, instruments, relate outwards into the world. Grasping, walking, talking are karanas. Also, our powers of sight, hearing, taste, smell, and touch are karanas. They relate outward into the world. We have one karana that doesn't connect to the world. We have one karana that's entirely internal. That is your mind. So, here we go. Karya, body. Karana, sense organs and mind. These are prakritihi hetuhu. Nature is the cause, the underlying, the reality. I don't want to use that language. Your body, senses, and mind exist because of prakriti. Not only body, senses, and mind, but even kartritva, the sense of agency. When you said, if you were to say, you came here to class today, your body came, your mind came. Satchidananda Atma, consciousness, doesn't come and go. It can't come and go. It's already everywhere. Consciousness is all pervasive. So when you say, I came to class, you're not referring to consciousness. Consciousness doesn't come to class. That sense of agency, kartritva, we've also used the word ahankara, ego in a sense of the feeling of being an individual person, the sense of individuality. That is part of your mind. The sense of agency, the ahankara, ego, are all aspects of your mind. Now here comes our viveka. So karya, body, karana, organs, including your mind, and kartritva, all of the conditions of your mind, all of these are born of prakriti, as opposed to second half purusha, consciousness, chit, chaitanya. That because I like this definition best. That because of which you know what's happening right now. How's that for a definition of consciousness? That because of which you know what's happening right now. That's a good definition of consciousness. Here called Purusha. That Purusha, last line, Uchyate, is said to be the hetu, the cause. The cause for what? Bhoktritve. Don't translate it as enjoyment, but rather experience. So it is the cause for the experience of sukha and dukkha, and not just sukha, pleasure, dukkha, pain, etc., etc., etc. We could add everything you experience because of consciousness. Now here's the viveka, the discrimination that we're talking about. A discrimination between that which is experienced and the experiencer. What is experienced? Actually, let me turn it around. Who is the experiencer? And this is where we make the mistake. When you drink a cup of coffee, you say, I experienced the coffee. Well, in that experience of the cup of coffee, let's find out, where is the experiencer? Does your tongue experience coffee? If you chop, I'm sorry to be a little facetious and weird, chop off your tongue, put it in a cup of coffee. Any experience? I'm sorry to be weird, but there's no experience there. Your tongue doesn't experience coffee. It's an instrument. An instrument has to be wielded. Hammer is an instrument. A microscope is an instrument. Your eyes are instruments. Your ears, your nose, your tongue is an instrument of knowledge, jnana, indriya, jnanendriya. All these instruments have to be wielded. Therefore, your tongue doesn't experience the coffee. Experience takes place for the one who wields the instruments. Who is the one who wields the experience? Purusha, consciousness. The conscious being is the root of all experience. Just to use simple language, experience takes place in consciousness. Experience can't take place anywhere else. Experience takes place in consciousness alone. Therefore, your experience of sukha, dukkha, pleasure and pain, and everything else, including that cup of coffee, all those experiences take place because of Purusha, the conscious being, which is your essential nature. And that is now meant to be discerned. That's our topic. We have to discern the experiencer from the experienced. By the way, your tongue is an object of experience. Not the experiencer. Your tongue is experienced. Your body is experienced. All of your organs are experienced. Your mind is experienced. So here is an application of one of the most powerful teaching methodologies used in Advaita Vedanta. That teaching methodology, in the technical word for it is Atma Anatma Viveka. This is a name of perhaps the most well-known teaching methodology in Vedanta. Atma, you know. Anatma, opposite of Atma. Viveka, discernment. Discernment of what is Atma and discernment of what is Anatma, and discerning the difference between those two. That discernment is crucial, as I said in my introductory comments. As long as you fail to discern what is you and what is not you, what is I and what is not I, what is Atma and what is Anatma. The failure to discern properly causes suffering. Anything that you treat as I, anything that you endow with a sense of, I-ness doesn't have the right word. Well, we'll use the more common word, identification, abhimana. Anything you are identified with becomes a source of suffering. If you have something and you're not identified with it, it's not a source of suffering. This is an anecdote. I've told this long ago. I haven't told it for a long time, so I'll tell it right now. Many people are really identified with their cars, and therefore the car becomes a source of suffering. Notice that this fellow who with the fancy new car will park it at the far corner of the parking lot at the mall. They have to hike a half an hour to get to their car. With all their packages, they have to hike to their car. They park it there because, God forbid, somebody should put a little dent or nick in it. Now, the point is that they bought that car because they wanted it to be a source of happiness. I think it's a source of suffering. Look at that. And now the anecdote. When I was, I got my first job in California. This is 1979 maybe? I don't know. I don't even remember. Anyway. And I had the old car I drove as a student. I drove it all the way across the country, and now I'm living and working in the suburbs of Los Angeles. And the car was really junk. I mean, it was so much junk. It had this 3-speed on the column, and if you didn't shift properly, the shifter would actually disconnect from the transmission. So it would just flop around, and it wouldn't change your gear. So you'd be stuck in first gear. Anyway, the anecdote goes like this. One day I get a phone call, one night, 3 a.m., I get a phone call from the police. Your car is parked in front of somebody's garage. I didn't park the car there. The police explained, your car was stolen. And apparently, the thieves drove it away. They could hotwire it. They drove it away. And what happened? The transmission fell apart. They were stuck in first gear. So how far will you go in first gear? Now, the point of that anecdote is, I wasn't identified with the car. I thought it was hilarious. Of course, they had to break a window to get in and all of this. I could care less about this old car. So the point of the story is, if you're identified with the car, it becomes a source of suffering. You buy it to make you happy. it becomes a source of suffering. If it's just a car, just a form of transportation, it won't be a source of suffering. If it gets a dent or a ding, or if it's stolen, who cares? It's just a thing. This is a very pragmatic attitude, but now watch where this goes. Anything you get the principle, anything you're identified with will become a source of suffering. I'm not saying it's always a source of suffering, but in certain circumstances, whatever you're identified with will become a source of suffering. Like your job. Are you identified with your job? Think about several thousands of Twitter employees who have just lost their jobs. If you're identified with your job and you lose your job, it's a big deal. If you're not identified with your job, you'll get another one. That's it. Let's bring this home. If you're identified with your grown children, you will suffer. If you're identified with your body, you will suffer. If you're identified with your mind, you will suffer. You get the message. Anything you are identified with, guaranteed to become a source of suffering under certain circumstances. Not all the time. Your car is often a source of enjoyment. Your children are usually the source of enjoyment. But under certain circumstances, the car will be a source of suffering. Under certain circumstances, your children, if you're identified with them, will be a source of suffering. Okay, enough said. Let's continue. Purusha prakritisto hi, Purusha prakritisto hi, bhungte prakriti jan gunan, bhungte prakriti jan gunan, karanam guna sangosya, karanam guna sangosya, sarasadyoni janmasu, sarasadyoni janmasu. Good. Purushaha, which is prakriti staha. Nicely said. Of course, who's saying? Sri Krishna. So, Purusha, consciousness, which is prakriti stha. Stha, standing, abiding in prakriti. Consciousness abiding in the body and mind. It's our definition of jiva. A living being is consciousness abiding with a body and mind. That Purusha consciousness abiding with a body and mind, bhungte, experiences what? Gunan, qualities, prakriti jan, born of prakriti, born of nature. There's some technical background here that says that the physical elements, 5 elements in ancient times, 100 elements in modern times, it's understood that these elements are all products of the gunas, in particular, products of tamas, tamoguna. So here, when it says that you experience the gunas, means you experience the physical world which is a product of tamas, tamoguna. And what's being said here is that consciousness dwelling, I'll paraphrase, consciousness dwelling in your body and mind experiences whatever you come in contact with, but there's a subtext which isn't said very clearly here, so let me add it. And the question is, are you, as the conscious observer, as the awareful witness, are you truly affected by everything you experience? In conventional wisdom, we're affected by everything we experience. That conventional wisdom is wrong, born of ignorance. Your mind is affected. Absolutely, your mind is affected. But the consciousness that reveals the condition of your mind is utterly unaffected. When happiness and sadness takes place in your mind, that happiness and sadness affects your mind. You are the observer of the happiness and sadness present in your mind. As the observer, you are utterly unaffected. This has to be understood. And it's not easy to understand because it feels like we're affected. When happiness is present in the mind, it feels like it affects you. When sadness is present in the mind, it feels like it affects you. That feeling is misleading. And we'll use the typical example you've seen me use many times before. Feelings can be misleading. What you see is not what you get. Experiences can be deceptive. You see an orange crystal. It's not orange. You know that very well. This is not an orange crystal. It looks orange. It seems orange. But the crystal remains utterly unaffected by the orangeness. Orangeness belongs to the cloth. You've seen this metaphor before. It means, the way we use the metaphor, orangeness belongs to the cloth like sadness belongs to your mind. The orangeness of the cloth seems to affect the clear crystal, like the sadness of your mind seems to affect consciousness. But just as the orangeness of this cloth doesn't affect the crystal at all, in the same way, the sadness present in your mind doesn't truly affect your consciousness at all. This has to be discovered, has to be understood properly. Okay, so there's the first half. Where are we? There we are. So Purusha, consciousness, which is prakritistaha, abiding in your body and mind, it experiences everything you come in contact with, and the reading in between the lines experiences everything without being affected by anything that's experienced. But due to ignorance, you feel like you are affected, and that's where the problem comes. If you feel like your body and mind are affected, that means you're identified with your body and mind. If you weren't identified with your body and mind, it wouldn't feel like you're being affected. If you were so clear in your mind, sorry to use a pun, if you were clear in your mind that this wasn't an orange crystal, then you would never get confused. In the same way, if you were clear in your mind that you were not the body and mind, you would never get confused. You would never think that what affects your body affects you. What affects your mind affects you. But this is a problem of ignorance. Due to ignorance, asya, for the ignorant person, who is guna sangha, we'll translate it, identified with the gunas, attached. Attachment is okay. Identified, I prefer here. For an ignorant person who is identified with the body and mind, this becomes the karanam, the cause. Identification with the body and mind becomes the karanam, the cause. The cause not only for suffering in this life, but the cause for suffering in future lives as well. Sri Krishna nicely reminds you, this is the karanam, cause for sat asat yoni janmasu. It is a cause for janmasu, for getting reborn again and again into yoni, into wombs that are sat, desirable, and asat, undesirable. What is an asat yoni? How about being born to a cockroach? Cockroach, I think they lay eggs. So imagine that your birth begins as a cockroach egg. That's pretty bad. And that is held to be a possibility if you live a life ruled by this ignorance. So this ignorance is not only the cause for suffering in this life, but according to Sri Krishna, it's a cause for suffering in future lives as well. This ignorance is in the form of the lack of discernment between the experiencer, the experienced, lack of discernment between kshetrajna and kshetra, field of experience. In this verse, failure to discern the difference between purusha, the consciousness, which is your essential nature, and prakriti, nature manifest as your body and mind. Next. Upadrashtanumanta cha bharta bhukta maheshwaraha paramatmeti chapyukto dehesmin purusha paraha. Start with that last line. Purusha, in this context, consciousness. That consciousness which is asmin dehe, inside this body. Same thing as what he said in a prior verse. That consciousness which is inside this body, Sri Krishna says, is paraha. This reminds me of a discussion we've had before. Most people think that consciousness is ordinary. Anything that you have constantly tends to be taken for granted. If you have good health constantly, you'll take it for granted. If you have lots of money constantly, you can take it for granted. Whatever you have constantly, we tend to take for granted. How long have you had consciousness? We take it for granted. We fail to appreciate the absolutely extraordinary nature of consciousness. Eventually, engineering and science will be able to duplicate the powers of a human being in the form of some kind of robot. It won't happen in our lifetime, but eventually, within several hundred years, there will be robots that are every bit as capable as you are. Again, not in our lifetimes, but I think 100, 200 years, definitely. We get a few more Elon Musks, and definitely we will have these incredibly powerful. In fact, why equal to you? Better, more capable than you and I. More capable in terms of physical strength, more capable in terms of intelligence, more capable in terms of lifespan. So we'll live 80 years, that robot can live longer. So, what is the point here? What is it that differentiates you from that robot? You are a conscious being. That robot is a machine. Whatever happens in your mind is known to you. Whatever happens in a robot's computer mind, it's not known to anyone. It's a thing. It's a computer. There's no consciousness behind the computer brain, unlike there is consciousness behind your brain. This is absolutely unique to living things, living beings, which means there's consciousness not just in a human brain, but even in a cockroach brain. Not much. Cockroach brain can't do much, but consciousness is manifest in living beings. That consciousness will not be manifest in the computer brain of that futuristic robot. This is to point out the extraordinary nature of consciousness, something that we take for granted. Your consciousness is not ordinary. Your consciousness is extraordinary. First of all, before your body was born, that consciousness existed. When your body no longer exists, that consciousness will go on without change. That consciousness, which you call my consciousness, is not your consciousness at all. It is the one all-pervasive consciousness we call inner divinity, which shines or illumines the mind of every sentient being is illumined by that one and same all-pervasive consciousness. That's not ordinary. Sri Krishna says, paraha, supreme, extraordinary. That extraordinary consciousness, go up to the beginning of the verse now. That extraordinary consciousness is upadrashta, observer. The observer of the activities of your mind. The awareful witness. We sometimes use the word sakshi. Here Sri Krishna uses a synonym for sakshi, anudrashta, observer. That consciousness is anumanta. Translated here, witness is a good translation. It has a more literal meaning, anumanta, of one who gives permission, is anumanta. In this sense, your mind has permission to do whatever it wants to do. Consciousness, there's something very important here. Your consciousness doesn't control your mind. When you feel sad, can you use your consciousness to push the sadness out of your mind? We've had the discussion before that consciousness doesn't do anything. Consciousness can't do anything. Consciousness is not an agent of action. Whatever happens in your mind is not controlled in any way by consciousness. That's what this word means, anumanta. Whatever happens in your mind is permitted to happen by consciousness. Consciousness simply reveals. Consciousness choicelessly reveals whatever happens in your mind. That's the sense of anumanta. Also, your consciousness is bharta, the sustainer of your life as a sentient being. Your consciousness is the bhokta, the focal point of all experience. Without consciousness, you would have no life as a sentient being. Without consciousness, there would be no experience. And your consciousness is Maheshwara. Oh, that sounds so good. Your consciousness is the great Lord. Now, if you're going to call consciousness Lord, you have to say Lord over whom? We've already said your consciousness has no control over your mind. So how is that Maheshwara? How is that the great Lord? Put it in the context of your dream Your consciousness is that because of which your dream creation can exist. The creation, sustenance, and destruction of your dream world due to consciousness. Even while you're awake, your thoughts are constantly getting created, sustained, and destroyed. Your emotions, they arise, they hang around for some time, then they fade away. Your moods, a mood arises, a mood lasts for a while, a mood goes away. Creation, sustenance, destruction. There has to be a figurative Ishvara who's responsible for all that consciousness, is that because of which thoughts arise and pass away, emotions arise and pass away, and moods arise and pass away. That consciousness, in the third line, Paramatma, iti cha api uktaha, cha api, and also that consciousness, uktaha, is called Paramatma. The consciousness that you thought was ordinary, Sri Krishna says, it is in fact Paramatma. It is extraordinary. That consciousness that abides in your body and mind that you might think is extraordinary, Sri Krishna says, it is in fact extraordinary. One more verse. Yahevam veti purusham, yahevam veti purusham, prakritim chagunai saha, prakritim chagunai saha, sarvata vartamanopi, sarvata vartamanopi, nasabhuyo bhijayate, nasabhuyo bhijayate. Yaha, one who, veti, understands. One who understands what? Purusham, consciousness, prakritim cha, and prakriti. Gunaihi saha, prakriti along with its gunas. One who understands evam, thus. Thus means as Sri Krishna has just described, as Sri Krishna has explained, one who discerns the difference between Purusha and Prakriti. But notice, we're not trying to discern in a philosophical way. We're trying to discern in a very experiential way. You experience your body. By the way, what's philosophical about that? You experience your body, you experience your mind, you experience suffering. This is not abstract philosophy. In your experience of your body and mind, suffering arises. That suffering is experiential. This is not philosophy. That suffering occurs, as we've discussed at length in this class. Suffering occurs when you fail to properly discern Atma and Anatma, the truth of who you are and what you experience. That's blurred again and again. If you can't tell the difference, I'm going to be a little silly. I tend to do that, as you know. The chair I'm sitting here has an arm. If I say this arm is me, how ridiculous does that sound? It's absurd. The arm belongs to the chair. Well, it is equally true that this arm belongs to the body. This arm belongs to the chair. This arm belongs to the body, and neither of them belong to me. Now that sounds so obvious, but in practice, when your arm hurts, do you say, the arm attached to this body hurts? If this arm is broken, the arm of this chair, you won't say, my arm, this may be your chair, but if the chair if the arm of the chair is broken, you won't say my arm is broken. You'll say the arm of the chair is broken. But when this arm gets broken, you won't say the arm of the body is broken. You'll say my arm is broken. This is confusion. Massive confusion. We have to come out of that confusion. That's why we're meeting every week for these classes. Gradually, these teachings will remove that conclusion so that you know that what happens to this arm affects the chair. What happens to this arm affects the body. And neither of the two affect my true nature as unchanging consciousness. I am the unchanging consciousness by whom all these changing conditions are known. You know that expression, the still point at the center of the storm? Consciousness is that still point, unmoving, unchanged, utterly unaffected. If you are at that still point, by the way, that still point in a storm, that's a fact. In a hurricane, where the winds on the outside are going 150, 200 miles an hour, in the eye of that storm, the winds are calm. We know that to be true. Actually, they fly aircraft right through these hurricanes to make measurements, and they measure this again and again. In the eye of the hurricane, the winds indeed are calm. And what we're describing now is the still point, at the core of your being. The still point at the core of your being is consciousness. And that consciousness remains utterly unaffected by whatever is spinning around you, no matter how chaotic, no matter how stressful or difficult the circumstances can be. Your core, the core of your being as consciousness, is that still point. When this is known, yaha veti, when one knows this, evam, fully and completely, and one can discern that purusham, that consciousness at the still point of your being, when that can be discerned from the prakriti spinning around, when you can discern that fully and completely, sarvata, in all manners, vartamanaha api, even while you're engaged in activities, even while that prakriti continues to spin around you. And allow me to point out the obvious, that your life, if you think your life is complicated and chaotic, I have bad news for you, and that is your life will continue to be complicated and chaotic until the day comes, you've heard my joke many times, until the day comes when you can finally rest in peace. Until that day comes, your life will continue to be complicated and chaotic, which means if we're a little wise, we should probably learn to accept that complication and chaos as a natural part of life. Wouldn't that be a good idea? It would be a very good idea. Because by accepting that complexity and chaos as a normal part of life, that allows you to turn your attention away from that disk of chaos and confusion, turn your attention within towards that still point. And appreciate that in the midst of that chaos and confusion, you are absolutely okay. You can discover that vartamane api, even while you are engaged in your daily activities, you can find that still point within you, that so-called still point at the center of your being, that unchanging consciousness. The still point at the center of your being is unchanging consciousness. With that discovery, you will be utterly unaffected by the chaos and confusion in this life and in the next. Shri Krishna assures here Arjuna, na saha, that person, na bhuyaha, never again, abhijayate, will get reborn. So here, there's, what do you call it? Fringe benefit? That's a funny expression to use. But you get freed from suffering in this life, and as a so-called fringe benefit, you don't get reborn, and therefore you don't have to suffer in future lives. Please notice, though, that I'm calling it a fringe benefit to make sure that it's clear it's secondary. The primary focus of these teachings of Advaita Vedanta in general and of Sri Krishna in particular in the Bhagavad Gita, the primary purpose of these teachings is to gain freedom from suffering here and now. Too often in the Hindu tradition, the emphasis is put on the next life. Sri Krishna doesn't make that mistake. You need not make that mistake. The focus is on here and now, to live free from suffering here and now by finding that still point at the center of your being, that unchanging consciousness. Then, secondarily, as a fringe benefit, so to speak, you will be freed from rebirth by that knowledge, and you will not be reborn and not be subject to suffering in a future life. And that's a good place for us to wrap up today. A couple of quick announcements. Tomorrow, Sunday, we have our new schedule now. So our Vedanta class, we're studying Upadesha Sahasri, this brilliant text of Adi Shankara. We'll be studying it tomorrow at 11 o'clock. And then immediately after the class, we have satsang question answer at 12. We met for the first time on the new schedule last week, and it seemed to work quite nicely. So please come and join us. You get these powerful teachings of Shankara, 11 o'clock, and then 12 o'clock noon, satsang, question answer. Remember, daylight savings time ends tomorrow, so make sure you come at the right time. I'll remind you again that we have, some people have difficulty hearing these lectures, so we have again set out our assistive listening devices. So if you have a hard time hearing, you can wear the headphones and it'll amplify my voice. You'll hear much more clearly. And again, also with our new schedule, after our closing prayers at the altar, I'll come back here and sit out for a while if you'd like to meet with me, or if you'd like to greet me at the end of the class. I'll sit out for a few minutes and greet you at that time. We'll conclude with our prayers. Om Gananahan Tva Ganapatigam Avamahe Kaving Gavidam Upamashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspataha Nashrinvan Utabasira Sadhanam Om Mahaganapataye Namaha Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti Bhera Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshina Murtaye Namaha Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramhanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha. Sarve Santu Niramayaha. Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu. Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet. Asato Ma Sadgamaya. Tamaso ma jyotirgamaya. Mrityor ma amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.